Hey, what's up? How you doing? Midterms are just around the corner, so I thought today I would talk about some of my studying tips and the ways that I have found to be the best way to study in college in order to get the best grades. I have found that studying in high school and college, some things are the same, but a lot of things are very different because college is more advanced and it is usually a lot more work, and midterms and finals are usually a whole lot more material than you're used to in high school. So here are my top tips for how to study in college to get good grades. The first step in studying for college is to be organized. This can be with a physical planner, this can be with a planner on your phone, on your laptop, whatever. Just something for you to write down everything in or type it in. Test date, project due dates, speech dates, any date that is important you need to write down in your planner. This is probably pretty obvious to most people. You don't want to forget it, and so you need to write it down in your planner, but also on top of that, it helps you physically see every single time you check your planner when something is due or when you have a test. So that way you are a little bit less likely to keep putting it off. I mean, we are college students, so you probably still will procrastinate somewhat. But when you're actually seeing how close the date is approaching, it gives you a visual representation of it, and it lets you see this test is in 2 days. I really should have started studying for it already, so I'm gonna start studying. Tip number 2 is to study in increments. This is something that procrastinators struggle with. Cramming is a very common term, and it's a very popular thing that people do the night before a test. You cram a lot of information up into your brain because you don't have much time. And then the next day you forget a lot of the information that you crammed in there because short-term memory is not as sufficient as longer-term memory. So if you start studying ahead of time, say 3 or 4 days before a test, and you start studying different sections each day, the more you study over a longer period of time, the longer you're going to remember it after you've studied. So therefore, the more likely you are to remember it during the test. Personally, what I like to do is set up maybe 20 minutes of studying per day, especially if I have a really busy schedule or a really busy week and I don't have a lot of time to devote to studying. You can usually carve out 20 minutes to half an hour out of your day, even if it's super busy, to try to study, even if it's right before you go to sleep. Say I have a test on Friday and I start studying for it on Tuesday. I would like to give myself about 20 to 30 minutes to start studying on Tuesday. I take a section of the material and I start studying that. And then on Wednesday, I give myself a little bit more time, maybe 30 to 40 minutes, and I learn a new section. And then I go back and review from Tuesday. I don't spend nearly as much time on it, but I go over it again just as the repetition in my head to help me remember. Then on Thursday, I give myself the most amount of time because my test is the next day. I study the last section of information, and then I go back and review the other 2 sections that I did as well. Because of the repeated amounts of time that I looked over the information, it helps me remember it. It also does not require me devoting like 4 hours just the night before the test, just cramming all of the information in my head and hoping it sticks. And then it's always a good idea, if you have time the day of the test, to go over all the information one more time, just as an extra little dose of repetition if you have time. Tip number 3 is when you're studying, say things out loud. If you're in a library or a dorm and your roommate's like right there, I get that you don't really have the option of saying everything out loud. But if you are somewhere where you can speak out loud and it not be seen as crazy, then studying and reading the material out loud really helps you to remember it better. You're utilizing different parts of your brain when you write, when you read, and when you speak. So a lot of people always say to write your notes down a second time when you're studying instead of just reading over them. You can do that, especially if it's a big test. I've done it before. Or when you're making like flashcards or something, you're obviously writing it again. But if you don't want to take the time to write everything out, because that does take a lot of time, then just simply reading your notes out loud does help, besides just reading it in your head. Tip number 4 is to take clean notes, and I guess sort of with this one as well as take notes. If you just copy down like little things that your professor says, or just sort of jot down random things, and you keep sort of messy notes or unclear notes, you are going to hate yourself when you go back and study. In class, try to focus on taking the most comprehensive and clean notes that you possibly can, so that way you don't have to go back and search your book for everything that you need, or text your friends asking for the notes from class. And this is especially true if your professor does not use PowerPoints or they don't upload notes online. Some professors do, and that way you can just go back and look at their notes online. You don't really have to take notes in class, but sadly not all professors do that. I think I have one professor this semester who does that, so it just all depends on who you have. But if you are in a class where you have to take notes, make sure that you can understand them. Tip number 5 is for when you're in a class where you have to read the textbook, and that is to gradually read up until the test. So say your test is over chapters 1 through 6 and it's a month into school. Don't try to cram reading chapters 1 through 6 a week before it starts. Gradually read your book throughout the month and take notes on what you're reading. So that way when it comes test time, you don't have to again cram reading every single chapter right before the test and try to take notes on it. You already have the notes from the reading, so that way you don't have to go back and reread the chapters because you have your notes for them. So that way studying your notes from your chapters is just like studying the notes from the lectures. Everything's all together, you don't have to do any extra reading, it's just much easier on yourself when it comes test time. And yes, I realize this is sort of annoying leading up to the test, but once it actually gets to study time, you will be so thankful you did this. But again, this one only really applies to classes where you have tests that are based off of the book and the lectures. A lot of my classes are not really like that, but I have had some, and it really does help when you take notes along the way from your reading. I promise, it's helpful. Tip number 6 is a pretty universal one, but that is to make flashcards for any vocabulary terms, or just really any terms that come out of your chapter or from your lectures. If you're in a situation where you're taking like a Scantron test where a lot of it is vocabulary or a lot of it is terms and it's not really essay sort of answers, flashcards are your best friend. It minimizes the amount that you have to memorize because you're just memorizing definitions, and you can keep them with you in your backpack and literally just pull them out when you have a spare 5 minutes in between classes and just start quizzing yourself. What I like to do is keep them in 2 separate piles of once I've like memorized the term, I put a flashcard in a different pile, and then the ones that I'm struggling with, I keep in another pile. So that way I have the harder ones separated from the easier ones, so I can keep going over the harder ones, and it's just very convenient, and it really does help if you have a lot of vocabulary terms. For one of my classes last semester, I had like 200 terms and I made 200 flashcards, and yes, while that is a lot of flashcards and a lot of extra time, it was worth it in the end. I got an A on that final, and a lot of it was attributed to those nifty flashcards. The next tip is to avoid study groups if you legitimately want to study. And I'm talking about study groups of like a group of your friends in one class saying, hey, let's get together and study for this test. And you say, okay, and then you don't study for it whatsoever and you rely entirely on that study group to get all your studying in, yeah, you're gonna fail that test. Some classes do offer like tutor sessions or tutor study groups, and those are a completely different animal. I've never gone to one of those, so I can't speak to that. But just study groups of actual friends getting together, it's like a mixture of social time and study time, but you know, when you're mixing social and study, social's gonna probably win out. So the amount of studying that gets done is generally not enough for you to actually memorize the material. I'm not saying don't go to these, I've gone to them and they're a good time. It's a good way to get some social time in and at the same time kind of feel like you've accomplished something. I'm just saying do not rely on them to get all of your studying in. If you want to go to a study group, definitely go by all means if you have time outside of the study group to get all your real studying done. Tip number 8 is to work smarter, not harder. This is one of my... There is a gnat. This is one of my favorite phrases because it is very true. Sort of like what I said with the flashcards, how I separated the 2 out, so terms that I knew pretty well versus terms that I didn't really know and I had to study more. And I just focused more on the terms that I didn't really know. That is an example of working smarter, not harder. If you already have a pretty good grasp of some of the information, do not waste your time continuously going over that, the same amount that you're going over the stuff that you don't know as well. Do not think that you have to give equal amounts of time when studying to stuff that you kind of already know versus the stuff that you don't know at all. If to understand the material, all you really have to do is look over the chapter, you don't even really have to take notes, you don't have to make flashcards, then by all means just look over the chapter. You know what you know. You don't need to make yourself do extra studying and extra work just to make yourself feel like you're studying properly. If you know something, then don't study. Just go into the test and ace it. If you know the terms for the test, but like all your friends are making flashcards for the test, but you already know it, then don't make the flashcards. You don't need them if you know it. Other people might have to study harder than you because they don't know it as well as you do. And my final tip for studying is to make sure you are setting yourself up enough time to study, even if that means saying no to something fun. This last tip is kind of a downer, I realize that. But sometimes you just don't have time to go out and party or go out and hang out with your friends or go do something that you want to do because you do need to study. If you watch my video about how to make a 4-point in college, I talked mostly about how to section out your time and time management and everything. And I feel like a lot of this last tip comes with that. If you're really good at managing your time, this might not be as big of an issue for you. But if you're one of those people that kind of struggles with time management a little bit, this can bite you in the butt sometimes. You might be putting off studying or putting off writing an essay or putting off whatever it is you're doing until the last minute, and then you realize like that crap's coming up on Friday, your friends want to go out on Thursday, but you haven't studied at all for it. Then you have to say no to going out on Thursday because you gotta study. So the real tip here is manage your time well, but if you're just not good at it, or if you really just have such a busy week that you haven't had any time to study until the night before, which I totally understand, believe me, then sometimes you gotta say no to the fun stuff. But there will always be another party, there will always be another hangout. Don't worry, one time missing it won't kill you. So those are my tips for how to study in college. Those are all things that I personally use to help me keep my good grades. I'm not the best test taker, so study tips really help me because I'm not good at just being able to sit down, study, and memorize everything immediately. I'm not one of those people. I do not have one of those kind of brains. I have to work a lot harder at it than some people, so that's why these tips have helped me, and I hope that they can help you. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, give it a thumbs up. You can also subscribe to me. I put out new videos every single Friday. If there's anything out there that you want to see, leave it in the comments below and I will make that video for you. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye guys.